now is the time for quiet men, actually. That the skills and traits that quiet men have naturally, like those deeper connections you were just describing, Eugene, along with a calmer demeanor, along with a willingness to listen more than you talk, a willingness to be introspective about privilege, actually, and power. All of those things are really needed right now.
Welcome to episode 44 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today I am joined by Ed Frauenheim, the co-author of Reinventing Masculinity, and today we get really deep on introversion and masculinity, and why now, of all times, is probably where we need introverted qualities in people the most in the workplace. And I found this really, really interesting, and not just biased because, yes, I am introverted naturally myself, but it really delved into what are those qualities of an introvert and how do we apply them to the workplace. It was something that I hadn't delved into before, and Ed was approaching it from a point of introversion and masculinity. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I won't get too much into it now, just give it a listen and let me know what you think. You can reach out to me on Instagram, giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, or shoot me an email. Hey, you can even leave a voice note here on Spotify and I'll get back to you like straight away. Again, let's get to it, straight to the episode. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Ed Frauenheim. Ed, it is great to have you here on the show, and I really appreciate Jim Young for making the connection and introducing us, especially since he had such a great in-depth insight into burnout, especially with expansive intimacy. And you also have a very interesting burnout story yourself. And one thing that I have realized a lot when it comes to people who have experienced burnout is that they tend to hit a rock bottom moment or a turning point or this moment of realization. And that brings them on a journey of self-recovery, growth, and development. And then somewhere along that journey, for some of us, we reach this spark or vision that we want to help others. And whether that be part of your journey, your self-recovery journey, that serving others is part of your growth and development, or maybe we just don't want other people to go through the same pain and experience burnout like we did. So what was that like for you? And why do you do what you do today?
Thanks, Eugene. Really grateful to be here. And again, grateful to Jim for connecting us. The story that I thought I would share with you related to burnout is having a heart attack in 2021 that in a way was, I believe, caused by burnout, work-related and a little bit life-related too. But basically, I had a moment where I was talking to a friend on the phone, walking in my local park, and I just had to sit down. I was feeling lightheaded and nauseous, and later went to the hospital and found I had a mild heart attack. And I had a specific kind of heart attack that is called a coronary artery spasm, which is to say it's not the kind that comes from a lot of plaque buildup in your arteries. I'm pretty fit. I'm doing yoga and swimming, but it tends to come from either smoking or doing methamphetamines or cocaine. I don't do any of those things. It was likely for me a case of stress that I believe had a lot to do with work. And in particular, I had been working to be a successful entrepreneur, Eugene, which was kind of a dream come true in a way. I'd left my company at the end of 2020 and was making my way doing this, but it was a lot of pressure on me as a guy to provide for my family, to succeed. And my schedule, if you looked at my Google Calendar, it was completely packed. I was taking on too much. I ultimately had like 20 projects that I was juggling. And I also was trying to teach my two teenagers how to drive learn how to drive a car in San Francisco, which is one of the worst cities to drive in the country, ranked second in one study in terms of worst cities to drive. And all of it added up to just a lot of pressure and stress. So I had great care at Kaiser Permanente Hospital. The doctors were able to open up my clenched artery with a little burst of nitroglycerin juice, you might say. And I came out of that, as you put it, in kind of a rock bottom place of like, all right, I got to change. I have to do less work, and I've got to be more intentional about what I do. And eventually I ended up realizing that there was also some work to be done around my identity as a man. And I learned that I wasn't alone in feeling kind of like I'd been a bad guy somehow by having to get help. That all these people sending me notes of support and congratulations that I was feeling better. On some level, it was great, but it also felt like I was not that self-reliant man that I'm supposed to be, you know? So what I learned is, and then I ultimately led to that spark, as you talked about, of helping others, is that I wanted to explore how coming out of a heart attack or other heart incidents, men often have a sense of broken masculinity. This is something that some researchers found in Canada. And I wanted to help guys see, like, we need to reinvent our sense of what it means to be a man to prevent and also recover from heart incidents and other big health scares. So that's a synopsis of my story and why I do what I do. I'm still working on these questions of masculinity and organizational culture to try to help them be places where men can feel free to live fuller lives, more soulful lives, and everyone around them, therefore, can be free to do that as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you say that you had the heart attack, but like, say, did you have any symptoms of burnout before the heart attack, or was that, let's say, your defining moment that you realized you had burnt out?
I guess the symptoms of burnout that I had were just a sense of the weight, you know, of so many meetings coming up and deliverables. And I've been working with different clients, different projects, all to sort of get things off the ground or keep balls in the air. As I said, I had probably 20 or 21 different projects that I was a part of or managing. This included helping to helping a client write a book. So I was a kind of a book coach, but also helping different projects related to masculinity and better workplace culture as well, helping try to bring more compassion to the policing realm was another one of my projects. So there was just a lot going on. And, you know, I know there's a number of different workplace culture burnout phenomena that weren't applicable to me because I was on my own. But I think the idea of taking a lot on and taking too much on, that was a big burnout marker for me or warning sign.
So you mentioned masculinity there a lot. So when you were doing entrepreneurship, was that around masculinity in the workplace?
Yeah, I was, and I still am, trying to help men and organizations rethink the ways we're expected to show up as guys at work. And the older models where we're supposed to be that kind of stoic, hyper competitive, barking boss don't really work anymore. If they ever did, you know, the older ways of kind of being that alpha male often ended up having us show up as cold and rigid and isolated in a world that's now calling for warmth, agility, and connection. And so this is one of my messages that came out of the book that I co-wrote in 2020 called Reinventing Masculinity, The Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection. And so I was doing work along these lines. And part of it was that, you know, wasn't taking off. You know, I wasn't selling a lot of workshops right away on these topics. I had a lot of opportunities to talk about these issues, but the money-making piece was not there. And I think that was tying into my own old visions of being a man, where you're supposed to be the provider, along with the protector and the procreator. You know, I do have two kids, two teenagers at the time. One's now 20. But I was trying to advance masculinity, but I needed to take my own medicine, you could say, Eugene.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, where we resonate a lot with Give Yourself Some Leeway, because one of the core visions that I have with the podcast for this year is trying to help men to realize that they can be burnt out too. And a lot of them tend not to openly express that they're experiencing anxiety, stress, they can't handle their workload, and they end up burning out, but they don't tell anyone. They either keep it bottled up, or they try to just put up a veil and be like, I'm not burnt out, because they're afraid that they'll be seen as inadequate, incompetent, that they're not capable of taking on a workload or of being a leader if they have to admit to weakness. And it's just about being vulnerable and admitting that you need help to complete the project. Shows that you care about the project, you care about your team, and that you're taking responsibility for the overall project. And I feel that it's somewhere in our culture that there is something amiss, that people can't talk about their mental health in the workplace. And I have been approached about it. When I started opening up and talking about my mental health in the workplace, I got so much negative backlash, being like, you can't talk about that. You're putting yourself in a really bad position if you talk about your mental health. We'd prefer if you didn't talk about your mental health. And that was supposed to deter me from talking about it. But if anything, I was like, okay, so many people are uncomfortable talking about their mental health. We need to normalize this.
I love that, Eugene. I admire you for doing that. In my case, those same culture issues were affecting me. I think that I felt on some level I got to man up, and manage all these 20 projects, and like I shouldn't admit that it was really pushing me to my edge, but it was. And thankfully, in ways, the heart attack may have saved me from having a worse heart attack later. This was a relatively minor one that I had. And I will also say that in my case, I have surrounded myself with a lot of people that I really respect, including my former employer. Great Place to Work is a great place to work. And I continued to have it as a client at the time. And when I told Great Place to Work and my other clients that I had a heart attack and I needed to take some time off or to reduce my load. And I also was having an anxiety about right afterwards also, Eugene, because I thought I was having more heart attacks. Thankfully I wasn't, but that's actually also a common thing that men, and I think women also, can feel like they're having another one because you're so scared of the first one. But at any rate, when I talked about this health issue, including a mental health issue with these different clients, I was amazed at how supported I was. My clients, every single one of them, I had about 7 or 8 at the time, besides these other projects, they were generous, they were caring, they were loving. They made space for me to stretch out assignment times. They sent flowers. They told me their own stories around some of these issues. So I learned when I opened up to my colleagues and clients and partners, this universe of folks beyond my immediate family and friends, I was surprised by how much it gave other people permission, or at least they felt comfortable sharing with me, and that made me feel better. It made me feel less shame, less alone.
Yeah, and I suppose from your experience then, let's say working with men in the workplace, um, do you find that burnout comes up as an issue in the workplace, especially with men? Like when I go in to try and research it and try to see how many people experience burnout in the workplace, most of the data I get back is it's mostly women that actually come back and say that they feel stressed or that they feel anxiety in the workplace, that they're more open, and that's where the data is. And I find it harder, especially in the kind of in Western society, in Western culture, for men to actually open up about about feeling burnt out or feeling stressed. Because even if the survey is anonymous, they always feel like, what if this comes back to me, and what if this affects my work or affects my identity in my career?
I think you're right. And the data that I've seen suggests burnout is a slightly higher rate. There's a higher rate of burnout among women, but it's also quite high among men. And to your point, a lot of men don't want to talk about it, to the point where they'll kill themselves before they will talk about it, unfortunately. And one area that I've worked in where I've unfortunately learned about this, unfortunately in the sense that I learned about unfortunate things, is the ski industry. And I learned among the employees, mostly men, who are taking care of ski lift equipment. These are, challenging outdoor jobs. You're in the cold, you're bundled up, dealing with heavy equipment. There's a lot of tough guys in that field, and a lot of people that love the outdoors. But when I was giving a workshop, actually on a different topic than burnout, it was about leadership development and effective teams. We started talking about the issue of psychological safety and how it's important to make space for people to feel authentic, be authentic. And one of the leaders of the ski industry in Nevada spoke up and said that two men on his squad had committed suicide in the past year, two men on his team. And then he said this amazing term, this amazing phrase. He said, F the tough guy show. He actually said the word F-U-C-K, and I won't repeat it on your blog or your podcast. But he was shaking, he was emotional. And it turns out everyone in the room, there's maybe 30 people in the room, just suddenly kind of got quiet and were really with him because he was naming the fact that this sense that we have to be macho and have to hold our feelings and really does not serve us and can lead to these tragedies. So in this field, for example, he and I last year developed a workshop and we presented a workshop. I had COVID, so I couldn't go, but he did it. And we're going to do another one this year. The name of the workshop is F the Tough Guy Show for people in the ski industry, the lift maintenance industry. So that's a place where you were right. It hasn't been talked about, but there's some room. There's a crack. The cracks are opening, and people are saying we have to talk about it. Does that make sense to you? Are you seeing a little progress?
100%. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And another part of that as well is that they feel that they can't talk to each other about it. And I've seen that a lot, where if you reach out to a friend and you try to open up about how you're feeling at work, and they do listen to you basically effing and talk all the negative talk about the workplace. Oh, I hate my job, I hate my manager, I hate this, I hate that. But they don't give you feedback and say, hey, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Do you want me to help you work through this? You don't get that kind of support. If anything, they'd say like, yeah, they'll join in on all the negative back talk about the manager, the team, whatever, or the state of the company, the state of affairs, and all this. But they just tell you to man up, put up with it, suck it up, stick with the job. Hey, I've been doing this for 10 years. You got to suck it up too. And that's the only feedback you get when you kind of reach out for help.
That's why I think I agree with you. And that's why I think it's so valuable to have people that are willing to be vulnerable or to say, let's look at this culture and its pressures on us to not be vulnerable. And another example with another client I've had is one of the leaders of a company was thinking about whether to talk about mental health at a sales meeting. And the leader got together some sales leaders and said, would it be good for me to talk about this topic and that topic and the other topic? And one of them was mental health. And one or more of the sales leaders said, we don't want to hear about that. That's a joke, the programs you have for that. And the leader that was going to give the talk bravely said, I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm going to share my own story of a time I had, a very severe mental health challenge. And when she delivered that talk, a lot of people in that sales room reached out to her and said, I'm so glad you did share your own story. And even one of the people that criticized the idea of talking about mental health, he himself acknowledged that he was dealing with stress and mental health challenges. So we need to get brave about this topic. And that's one reason I love your podcast vision here, Eugene, if I remember right, 100 burnout stories this year.
Yes, 100 burnout stories this year because yeah, exactly. I felt when I first started out, people were like, "Oh, I really respect that you're sharing your story, but it doesn't sound like what I'm going through. So maybe I'm not experiencing burnout, and I don't need the same approach as you." So they kind of like brushed it away, and I was like, "This is how I experienced it." But that doesn't mean it's the only way you can experience burnout. We all experience stress. We process stress, anxiety, and burnout in different ways. And yes, our approach must also be tailored to our unique experience. So that's why I went out on this, maybe a stretch goal, but hey, I'm going for it anyway. I'm going to get at least 100 burnout stories so that people can resonate with at least an element of one of those 100 stories. And they can see different angles and different approaches as to how people recover from their burnout or start that recovery journey. It's taking that first step in the right direction towards recovery.
Yeah, love it. You're making me think of another arena that might be surprising for some listeners, where I'm seeing some progress when it comes to men, but also women and burnout. Can I share another story of another industry?
Yeah, of course.
This is one that has to do with policing and public safety, law enforcement. And on the one hand, you might say this is the toughest, roughest, group, people that are having to deal with criminals, and they can't afford to be vulnerable, and they can't burn out, and we need them on the front lines. But there has been a lot of burnout and mental health challenges that lead to alcohol and drug abuse, marital problems, even all the way up to like suicide challenges. And that's a lot to do with those pressures we've been talking about, the hypermasculine pressures not to be emotionally expressive, and also concern that if they say anything about not feeling kind of mentally healthy, that they could lose their job or lose their ability to carry a gun. So there's a lot of it gets tricky. But the police industry is realizing they have a problem. There's a new kind of officer well-being movement that's been developing in recent years. And one of the projects I've been involved in is related to that, this Project Compassion. We did a workshop in the biggest jail in North America, or in the United States anyways. It's in where Chicago is, Cook County Jail. And we basically made space for people to share how they're doing around about the pressures of their job, and learned in a workshop with correctional officers that the protocols that are in place to deal with mental stress, like if there's a big violent incident, you're supposed to have a moment where you process it, where everyone gets together and talks about what they experience and how they feel. It doesn't happen, Eugene, generally. It's up to now, it's been like you're considered a bit weird if you need to do one of those things. So people kind of brush it off, and then the pressure builds. And there has been at least one suicide in that jail by the staff. And people shared about this. And by the end of our workshop, there was a greater desire to reach out to folks and ask them, how are you doing? Kind of like you said, not just complain about work, but say, how are you feeling? Is there any way I can support you? So while it's been bad in the law enforcement arena around burnout and mental health, things are getting better, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen a change, a change towards people actually opening up. And I think I kind of, it's not that I jumped on the bandwagon. It's that I just had that. I think it was lockdown that got a lot of people thinking, and it
Yeah,
was that
yeah.
it was that break from the workplace where people had a lot more time to actually think about their futures and what actually worked for them. And I think that downtime, like it was again a very scary and a very anxiety inducing time for a lot of people, and especially for families. And
Yeah.
but it gave people a chance to reassess their priorities. For so
Yep.
long, even in my own experience working, I was on autopilot. I was just
Mhm.
day in, day out, get the work done, go home, eat, sleep, day in, day out,
Yeah.
autopilot. And uh and eventually that did lead to my burnout, because it was so many unhealthy habits and me trying to constantly achieve more. I was taking on, and like at the time I was doing two different degrees in two different universities while working a 60-hour, 48 to 60-hour week. And
Right.
everyone was telling me I was insane. My manager was telling me I was insane, but at the same time, they were kind of congratulating me on my impeccable time management skills to be able to do that. And I was like, yeah, I'll take it. I'll like, I just took it in my stride. I was like, this is what I do. And as soon as I finished one project, I was like, okay, great. I've completed that, graduated from that. What's next? And it was almost like escapism, that I didn't want to look at, okay, what are my failings? What are my um setbacks? Why am I just looking for the next best thing to put on my resume, or add to my experience, and a piece of paper? what were my actual goals in life. And it took me completely burning out, being completely emotionally, physically, mentally exhausted from everything in my life. It had affected my relationships, it had affected my family, it affected my friends, and it had affected the way I had been working as well. But it took me to get to that point to realize, okay, I really need to reevaluate everything. And
Yeah. I was going to see if I could apply this concept you and I've talked about a little, the arrow and circle masculinity to what your story is, but
yes,
is there,
definitely, yeah.
can I try to do that? Yeah, because what you're describing is very similar to me trying to like achieve and succeed in this new entrepreneurial role I had. And Eugene, Jim Young and I have come up with this term of arrow and circle manhood, or being an arrow and circle man. And by that, we're just referring back to the old masculine symbol you see on, above bathrooms, like the circle, and then there's an arrow going up to the right from it. And what we observed is that what you described in your work approach and what I was experiencing prior to my heart attack was just focusing so much on the arrow, the purpose, the drivenness, the like, I'm going to penetrate this new market and achieve and fight the competition, like almost like it's a spear. And we are ignoring the circle, which can stand for, in some ways, the more feminine energies, things like receptivity, stillness, community. And when we ignore that part of ourselves, a lot gets lost and we aren't really fully human. And I think that's where we get out of balance and unhealthy things happen, like your burnout that really affected you and your and those around you, and in my case, my heart attack. But when we actually can embrace both, then we're a lot better off. In other words, it's almost like the yin and yang, and that the Asian symbol of having to kind of balance that sort of like energy, purpose drivenness with sort of like receptivity and vulnerability. Kind of weaving in the emotional life as well. And so when I had to have both of those when I recovered from my heart attack. I'm curious if you needed both of those kinds of sides of ourselves in your recovery, but I know I needed to like take more rest. I needed to be more still, and I also needed to be strong to kind of get through some scary things, including getting poked with a lot of IV needles, which was not my favorite thing. And I had to like, man up a little bit for that, but there was a lot of that. Okay, let in the love, to heal from the challenges I was facing. So I'm curious if that arrow and circle concept resonates for you and how you got through your burnout.
Yeah, I think one thing when I first burnt out and I had like a panic attack. I was hyperventilating at work and I was there like, this isn't me. And I was like it was my first ever panic attack. I started my day as normal. I worked 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Was in at 6 a.m. in the morning, and I had worked up until about 10 a.m. usual day-to-day task routine. And next thing I was like, okay, it's time for my morning break. And I was just off the phone to my manager, and next thing I just started hyperventilating. And next thing I was like, why can't I catch my breath? And it just caught me so off guard. I was like, do I have heart failure? I was just there like, am I going to collapse here? And I was like, Eugene, you're 27 years old. You're probably the healthiest person you know, especially out of your friends group, especially out of your all your work colleagues and everyone.
Yeah.
I was like, you're pretty healthy. I don't think it's a heart attack. And I literally just had to ring my manager back and was like, I have to go get this checked. I was like, I have to leave. I went straight to my doctor, and I was like, just going through all the symptoms, going through what I was going through, and my doctor was straight up was like, this is stress. You need to take time off work. And I quipped straight back. I was there like, but that's not me. I don't take time off work. And she was straight away was like, this is why you need to take time off work. Just take 4 weeks, and you need to work on yourself. And I love that. I was fortunate enough that a lot of people who had similar experience to me, straight away the doctor had put them on medication. But this doctor was like, look, I see your symptoms, I see what you're going through. You just need to take time to some quiet time and sit in silence. And I was so fortunate to have that doctor, not to push medication as the first option.
Yeah.
And it was great, but I quickly fell into again, my overachieving mindset. When I had that time off, I was like, what can I do to occupy my mind? And I got straight into running. Because I did running the year before. I did a Tough Mudder, like
Okay.
the obstacle
Yeah.
race challenge. And so I was like, look, I had great fun doing that last year. So that's what I'll do. I'll just run every day. But I found that running was just another form of escapism, because when I run, I I'm not alone with my thoughts. I'm so focused on running and trying to keep a pace and trying to get to the next let's say point before slowing my pace. I realized that I wasn't giving myself the time to process those thoughts. And then I
Yeah.
found that I actually enjoyed walking in nature a lot better.
Mhm.
And it was just that mindfulness of walking. Like, I was fortunate enough, especially when it came to lockdown, that we were limited to a 2 kilometer radius of our homes. And I was fortunate enough that the local park was within 1 kilometer. So I was like, great, I can just head down, was able to go into the forest and just be alone in my happy place in the forest for a few hours. I could be there for 2 hours, I could be there for 6 hours, just walking through the trees.
I
And it
love that.
just gave me that, it just gave me that alone time to actually process what I was going through. And was I happy with my current situation? Why wasn't I happy with this? um can I put A, B, and C in place? Would I be happier if I had A, B, and C in place? And what can I do to get A, B, and C in place? What's the first step that I can do now to get to that stage? And yeah, I think it was a lot of trial and error, trying to figure out what works for me, what is actually helping me here, and what is looks like it's helping. Like, the running looked like it was helping first, because I was like, great, I'm getting all those endorphins, I'm getting out in nature. But I
Yeah.
wasn't actually present in the moment. I was just using it to block out my thought process.
Yeah. I love that. And if I could apply, some of the language about the book that I co-wrote, is you were kind of experiencing the liberating power of compassion and connection, but maybe especially the connection piece, like to be connected in nature again. As you said, like a lot of guys, we're so focused on being self-made men that we just are so isolated, and to take a moment to realize that we are part of a wider, beautiful world can be really powerful. And I think then also to, connect to our own deeper callings. You asking about what did you really want is something that a lot of guys I don't think do. As you put it earlier, you were on autopilot, and I was kind of in a similar place for part of my career. You just are trying to rise up the ladder, get up to the top of the career, say, or make a lot of money, but to really connect to what our soul is calling us to do is important. And I think again, those can be a little bit more the arrow, or excuse me, the circle energies of let's get connected to the world around us, to our own deeper our sense of identity. And so, anyways, does that ring true? I hope I'm not imposing my analysis too much on you here.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when it came to the circle analogy with connection, people always thought that connection meant networking with others. And
Mhm.
I've always been an introvert. But it wasn't that I didn't like connecting with people. I just couldn't connect with people that I didn't resonate with, or that I
Yeah,
couldn't relate to. So it was easier just to stick to what I knew, and not, let's say, mix with people that I knew had very different views of the world, and that I just couldn't be around them for too long. It was just draining.
yeah,
But I found that first I had to be more connected to myself, because
mhm,
if I don't know where I stand, how can I show up and serve others if I'm not fully connected with myself first? And I think
yeah,
that's where I started. And then from that, I think it was especially once I started getting into podcasting, I found that I was connecting more with people that I resonated with, people who are on the same wavelength, and people who
mhm,
wanted to see that growth, that recovery, people who are there to serve others. And
yeah.
yeah, it was just that realization. I was like, oh, maybe I'm not as introverted as I initially thought I was. I just wasn't connecting to the right people.
That's really interesting, and I think introversion is another area I've kind of looked at, especially the connection of introversion and masculinity. And I've done some research with my colleague named Jennifer Conweiler. We think that now is the time for quiet men, actually. That the skills and traits that quiet men have naturally, like those deeper connections you were just describing, Eugene, along with a calmer demeanor, along with a willingness to listen more than you talk, a willingness to be introspective about privilege, actually, and power. All of those things are really needed right now. And so Jennifer and I have done some talks and some writing on this, and I think it's a good time to be a quiet man because the world needs us. I identify as a slightly introverted guy as well, and the willingness to kind of to do the things you did in the wake of your burnout really shows the power of not just the introversion itself, but that the broader ways in which you've kind of really reflected on how you want to show up as a man, it seems to me.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, the whole quiet man concept as well. I've actually come across it quite a bit, like just on social media and the likes. I would speak, let's say, public speaking and Toastmasters. I always loved singing. I was in musicals and theater productions when I was younger, and people would come up to me and be like, "Hey, it's like, how can you get up and talk and like sing in front of hundreds and thousands of people, but you won't talk to me in the canteen at work?" And I was like, "Oh, well, you don't talk to me, so I'm not going to start a conversation." And I just walk away from that. I'm just like, look, that's where I stand. And they would get so like riled up about it. They'd be like, how, like that they thought that it was a complete um inauthenticity on my part, that
I
I can
see.
go up and I can talk in public to 100 people, but I can't start up a conversation with 6 people at the table in the canteen.
Yeah. And that is a pretty good definition of an introvert. And introverts often do have a way of being presentational, or can be public speakers or performers. But yeah, sitting down with 6 people at a lunch table could be nerve-wracking, because that would be very draining to a lot of introverts. Um, Thankfully, more and more organizations are getting more balanced around the way they handle and navigate and manage for introverts versus extroverts. Like Jennifer Conmiller has some great ideas for this in some of her books. But first thing we need to do is to stop feeling bad about ourselves as introverts, and especially as introverted men. I think to realize that it's okay that we get more energy, and we need to recharge after social experiences. We need to have some solitude time, and take other measures to make sure we're thriving, because we can really help organizations and society right now, I think.
Is there an element for workplaces to also change when
For
it comes
sure.
to burnout, and uh, maybe a better culture in the workplace?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. And for introverts, for starters, but as we were just talking about those, but beyond also, like, for example, in terms of helping introverted folks and introverted men not burn out as much, it's important to create what you might call introvert friendly practices. That's the term I think Jennifer uses. Like having dedicated focus time where you're not expecting everyone to have meetings every hour of the day. It might be especially mornings where you can get work done in solitude. Also, just raising conversations about questions like introversion and gender identities. And so we come to see what are the pressures that introverts feel when, like, they always feel like they have to speak up in meetings when that's not their strength. They'd rather be reflecting and figuring it out and maybe writing something down later. Can we have meetings that are set up in a different way so that everyone's voice can be heard? And also the pressures on men to be kind of large and in charge, and be loud as opposed to necessarily learning. So those are some things that organizations can do. More generally around the burnout issue, I think giving employees more of a sense of more of decision-making power about how they do things is really big. Like where and when they work, for starters, and a lot of organizations are starting to push people back into work. And I think we got to be really careful about that, because one of the main parts of burnout and stressful situations at work is not having a say over your work, sort of feeling powerless. So that's a big piece of the puzzle. also just acknowledging our lives outside of work and the obligations we may have as caregivers, as fathers, as even friends who may have folks that we are caring for. That's an identity that we've ignored in large part for decades or centuries. And I think we're finally realizing that's a big part of why people get burned out, is that they're also taking care of somebody, whether it's a child or a parent or even a friend for those, especially during the pandemic, that was the case. So those are a couple of thoughts I would share. I think more and more companies know that they need to pay attention to our mental health. But there's room to grow for sure in terms of both awareness and then some of the steps to take.
Yeah, I definitely a aspect you covered there about if people taking care of people outside of work, that you have those extra commitments and family responsibilities. And one of the things that I, let's say, did mention like one of my first episodes where I talked about burning out in the workplace. And very
Okay.
quickly, someone quipped, was like, "Okay, are you saying that it was all your workplace's fault?" I was like, "No, it's not that the workplace drove me to burnout. It was that, yes, the workplace was a stressful environment, but it was because I didn't have a work-life balance. That,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I had stress at work, but then I was also taking on extra responsibilities outside of work. I had extra commitments, and because of that, because I didn't strike a balance between, like, I was doing overtime and everything at work, uh trying to keep up with demands, and then same outside of work, I was taking on extra projects and taking on extra degrees and everything, and it
Yeah.
was just, and on top of commitments and responsibilities as well. And I was literally firing in all cylinders, all 10 pots on the one hob, and
Yeah.
it just wasn't sustainable, and of course it all came crashing down. But people are
Yeah.
very quick to assume that burnout, it's all as a result of, it must have been the hours you were putting in at work, and it could only have been the hours at work, you just couldn't keep up with your workload. But I was like, no, there are like it's a work life balance, and yes, you have other commitments outside of the workplace as well, and people need
Mhm.
to I'd be more open about that as well, and also
Yeah.
not to blame let's say their outside commitments for not keeping up with I don't want to phrase this badly, but some people say they use it as an excuse, that if they're falling back on projects, they'll be like, oh, I can't do it because of my kids, it's my kids, almost saying it's my kids
Mhm.
fault that I can't commit to work.
Yeah.
And that's creating a very unhealthy relationship outside of work as well, that you're
Right.
blaming your family, or you're blaming your kids for not keeping up with your workload, rather than
Yeah.
seeing, okay, I need to strike a balance here and prioritize. uh, do I want to spend 60 to 80 hours a week at work, and and then try to make time for my kids, or do I need to prioritize spending more time with my kids and set a boundary at work?
Yeah. I love that framing, Eugene, and that boundary I think is important for managers and leaders to help set as well. And I think there are some workplace cultures that have kind of that older, what I would call a hyper masculine culture, where it's just go, go, go. We expect you to. It's like what Elon Musk was saying about Twitter. Like, we want hardcore Twitter. In other words, you're going to sleep at your desk. And when you set up those kinds of expectations, it quickly indicates that you can't be a caregiver and succeed in that company. And when you do that, you really lose a lot of diverse talent, like parents, or especially women who often have the caregiving roles. Um, and so I think company leadership has to be mindful of what is realistic, and do they really want to have a culture that is so work focused, as opposed to that more balanced and sustainable focus, that you can really have people of all different stripes bringing all their good ideas to the organization. And one example I'll give that I found inspiring is one of my clients is the CEO of a company, and he recently talked about how his work-life balance is not where he wants it to be. He used to be he is still an endurance race guy, like a triathlon guy. And he showed like he's gained more than 20 pounds and lost time on his races because he's not found a way to, over the last couple of years where he's been CEO, he was promoted from a lower, different position. Now he's like, I don't know how to balance all this yet. I'm working on it. But for him to be admitting that to his whole company, I think is part of that boundary setting. Like to say, it's not healthy for me to be working as much as I am. And so that kind of gives everybody in the company permission to say, okay, what is the healthy amount of work so that I also, such that I can be a healthy person overall. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you're seeing other examples like that with your guests or leaders kind of, paving the way, if you will, toward a non-burnout culture or a less burnout culture.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing people who are, especially in management and leadership roles, where they are giving the company 120, 150% themselves and expecting the employees to do the same. They'd be like, hey, I'm working 4 hours overtime here and I'm not getting paid for it. You should be in here too, working with me, working your ass off.
Right.
And that just causes conflict. And some leaders overstep the line where they're like, oh, the employees have left, I'm going to do their work while they're at home, and when they come in the morning they'll carry on. And the employees are less motivated. Then they'll be like, okay, they're overstepping a line here. That was my job, that was my project, and now they've basically put their stamp on it. It was like, do they want me to finish the project? Do they want me to continue on with the work that they've done on the project, or do they want to carry to completion? And it's again that manager, that leader, has to set a boundary, because if they're trying to take ownership, but they want the employee to still be responsible for carrying out the rest of the project, they're overstepping a boundary. It's the same as a relationship, that you wouldn't overstep if your partner was working in the home office, that you wouldn't come in and go like, oh, I see the project that they're working on, let me like change some of the data there, let me put in a little squiggle here. That wouldn't end well with your partner.
No.
So why would you do it in a business environment? Why would you do that between a leader and another team member? But I have seen, let's say, I have had guests who've talked about trying to identify what makes a burnout culture versus a growth culture. And they look at the likes of purpose, abundance, connectivity, empowerment, and downtime. It's actually, I have a guest, Jimmy Burrows. That's his that's his framework. It's called the PACE framework, and it's how he identifies a burnout culture in a workplace versus a growth culture.
That's nice.
And
purpose, was it autonomy, did you say?
So purpose, abundance, connectivity or connection, empowerment. So that's like training and everything, and then downtime as well. Downtime is very important, and I see downtime is definitely one of the biggest obstacles, or definitely one of the things that a lot of companies overlook, the importance of downtime. Because if we don't have time to recover, we can't be literally running on steam for, let's say, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, if we're putting in all our productivity into Monday and Tuesday. Or if we're not given that weekend off to recover, or at least a weekend off to recover. People have personal responsibilities on the weekend as well. The kids are out of school. They have the kids all weekend. They're probably coming in more burnt out on Monday morning. They're probably coming to work for some time off.
I love all that stuff. I wrote that down. That sounds really wise, that acronym, and your point about downtime, and that's definitely one that speaks to me right now, because I need to create more of it in my life right now. And I think you're right about the value of just time with nothing to do. I had an old boss who actually said, you could take one morning a day, or like one afternoon, and go to the beach. If you're in the evening, have a glass of wine, and just let the ideas come to you, that may come. And that there's a lot of research that rest and downtime, as you put it, are actually quite productive. They're not just a waste of time. They're actually time well spent.
Yeah, 100%. So what would be, let's say, when it comes to the workplace, as you said, for a more holistic environment. But what would be your top 3 takeaways to give to leaders and managers today that they should implement into a workplace to help prevent burnout culture?
What a good question here. And I'm going to start with one that might be a little bit unusual, but given the work I've done on masculinity and reinventing masculinity, I think the first one would be to like talk about the pressures that we feel as men, and how our workplace cultures are very what I would call hyper masculine. That is to say, arrow only ones, that we've been so focused on achieving, and not taking account a more fuller human way of being a man. And our workplaces are sort of similar, that there isn't really much place for downtime, for reflection, for the connection that we know is important. So that was my first one, like sort of awareness raising around masculinity in ourselves and in our workplace cultures. To me, the second one, I'm going to borrow one that E from your other guest, like empowerment, but real empowerment. Because there's a lot of fake empowerment where employees are told they can do something and then they actually get their project yanked away from them. Maybe like the example you gave. But truly letting employees manage themselves and letting teams manage themselves is really huge for people's their well-being, and for them to feel like they're adults that are being treated like adults that have some power in the world. So I think that sense of empowerment and power, really more than empowerment. And then I think a third one, if I was to pick of all the things to do there, I think I'm going to borrow again the downtime piece. I think we have to really reflect on the importance of people taking breaks and getting past the sort of the rat race mentality that we always got to be running and doing stuff, which led to your burnout, Eugene, and led to my heart attack. So I think the downtime, there's a lot of evidence behind doing that, just as there is on the power piece, empowerment one. So I would encourage people to think about masculinity and reflecting on it, power, empowerment, and downtime.
Brilliant. I think when I first came across the PACE framework, it kind of aligned with my framework, and straight away I took purpose, empowerment, and downtime. But I think the acronym PED isn't the best for managers. It's like, oh no, you need PEDs in your workplace.
That's funny. I love it.
So but yeah, so I definitely love it was Jimmy Burrows came up with the PACE framework, and I loved definitely the purpose, empowerment, and downtime were the first 3 that, let's say, aligned with my values when it comes to trying to overcome burnout, and especially in the workplace. And he throws in abundance and connection there. Again, very important elements. So yeah, I great that you hadn't heard about it yet. So I'm great that I was able to provide you with that value.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to look him up.
And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best place for them to find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best and easiest. You can search me on LinkedIn. I also have a website at edfrauenheim.com. I'm happy to connect with folks, talk more about these issues. I really appreciate the plug opportunity there, Eugene.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, could you take a moment to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify, because it really helps to improve the rating of the show so that it's more easily found by others who might enjoy the show just as much as you. And maybe take a moment to share with family, friends, or a loved one, because what better way to help break the stigma around mental health than to have that conversation with those closest to us. As always, reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on social media, eugene.leeway, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, because even though Give Yourself Some Leeway is like an outlet for me, I also want to give the highest value to you, my listeners. So I really depend on your feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to hear more about. So until I hear from you, take care of yourself. Maybe have a glass of water, crack a smile, and think of a way to prioritize your own self-care. So until next time, take care.